See, we are continuing in Mirza Hashem on Samech Gimel Amud Aleph, and we are picking up Kol Chosmei Berachos Sheva Mikdash, which is 2, 4, 6, 7 lines down from the top. So the Mishnah said as follows: Kol Chosmei Berachos Sheva Mikdash. So remember again, whenever they would complete the bracha in the Beis Hamikdash, they would end it off with the phrase of Mina Olam Vi'ad Olam. So the Gemara says Kol Kach Lama. So the Gemara says, like, why do you need such a long ending to the brachas? The fisha in onin amen b'mikdash, because the Gemara says we don't say the word amen, we don't answer amen in the Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara says, where do you know this from? Onin amen b'mikdash. From where do you know that we don't say amen in the Beis Hamikdash? Shne'emar. The pasuk says Kumu baruchu es Hashem Elokecha mina olam vi'ad ha'olam. So the Gemara quotes the pasuk from Nehemiah, and the pasuk says, this is the Leviim talking to Klal Yisrael. The Leviim say, stand up and bless Hashem min ha'olam vi'ad ha'olam. Va'omer vayivarach Hashem kvodecha u'meram al kol bracha u'tehila. So interestingly enough, so the idea over here is the Leviim said to Klal Yisrael, how do you bless Hashem? Literally min ha'olam vi'ad ha'olam. And the Gemara says, or the pasuk says, and the people blessed HaKadosh Baruch Hu in that way. So beautiful. So you see from here that a regular amen doesn't suffice, but rather again one requires a longer, almost like response to a bracha in the Beis Hamikdash. The Gemara says Yachol Kol Berachos Kulon Tehila and Tchila Achos. So the Gemara says maybe you would have thought that ultimately again for all other brachas, that there should only be one type of response. So the Gemara says, no. Every bracha, in other words, there's not necessarily one particular response for all brachas, but different brachas get different responses. Okay, beautiful. Then Mishnah goes on. So remember again, Chazal instituted that a person should inquire about how his friend is doing. Should inquire about his friend's welfare. Greet his fellow using the name of Hashem. So Gemara says, "Mai va'omer." What does it mean when it says va'omer? Right? The Gemara says. So remember again, the Mishnah quoted from the episode of Boaz, and then the Gemara quotes a pasuk. So after you quote from the episode of Boaz, why do you need a pasuk? V'chitema Boaz midai didn't have shekamar. So maybe you say Boaz maybe just did this on his own. In other words, Boaz just decided to greet people with the Shem Hashem, but wasn't necessarily operating within the confines of halacha. So Tashma Hashem Imchar. So the Gemara says Tashma Hashem Imchar Gibar HaChayos. Remember again that the pasuk says this is by Gidon. The pasuk says that the Malach says to Gidon, Hashem Imcha Gibar HaChayos. Hashem is with you, valiant one. So here you see that there's another example of someone besides Boaz greeting with the Shem Hashem. Maybe it's because it was a Malach. So maybe an angel is permitted to greet with the name of Hashem, but a regular person isn't. So when it says Tashma, Al Tavos Ki Zakna Imecha. The Gemara says that ultimately, again, which literally means do not put your mother, right? Don't put your mother to shame, even though she is old. So this idea of it, Rashi points out over here that when you see practices, right, past practices, so don't disparage them. Furthermore, again, the pasuk says that sometimes, literally, again, means sometimes in order to uphold the will of God, you have to go ahead and nullify the halacha. Which again, now be careful how you apply this. But what this actually means is as follows: that sometimes in order to uphold the law, you have to go ahead and negate certain precepts. So the Gemara says, Amarava, Haikra Mereisha the Sefer Midrash, Misefa the Reisha Midrash. So this pasuk can be understood either again from beginning to end or from end to the beginning. How so? Mereisha the Sefer Midrash, so you could explain it from the beginning to the end. Eis la sos la Hashem. So sometimes again the Gemara says that there is a time, ultimately again, to do for Hashem. My time, what's the reason? So the way we interpret this phrase is, sometimes you have to go ahead and punish people. Why do you have to punish people? Because they've nullified the Torah. But the pasuk could also be interpreted from the end to the beginning. So they've gone ahead and negated your law. In other words, sometimes even the tzaddikim don't act in conformance with the Ratzon Hashem. My time, what's the reason? Mishum Eis Lasos Lashem, because they are acting for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, sometimes even the tzaddikim have to go ahead and go against the word of Hashem in order to ultimately uphold that very word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As Tanya, the Gemara says, Hillel Hazakin Omer. So we'll say, so this pasuk where this concept really becomes the source for this idea that sometimes in order to bolster the law, or in order to bolster general ruchnius, you have to go ahead and take certain leniencies with other areas. So why is this coming up over here? Because the notion of greeting someone with the name of Hashem really doesn't seem to be something appropriate. It seems to be taking the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu quite lightly. So therefore the Gemara explains, no. The reason they were doing this was because, such in Boaz's time, there was a general decline in spirituality. Boaz felt, let me introduce HaKadosh Baruch Hu just even into the daily vernacular. So even though, again, one could tell you, but 1 second you're treating the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu somewhat disparagingly, so perhaps there were certain liberties taken with the name of Hashem, but it was done for the purpose of uplifting the general holiness of the people. Okay, beautiful. So the Gemara says, Hillel Zaken says as follows, Bizmana Machnisin Pazar. So literally again, in a time, Bizmana Machnisin, so literally in a time of gathering, go ahead and distribute, which means that if you live in a time of tzaddikim or of rabbanim who keep their knowledge to themselves and don't share it, make sure to share your knowledge with others. B'shas hamefazrim kanis. But if you live in a time where people, the rabbanim, are distributing their knowledge, then halacha l'maisa, you should go ahead and keep yours to yourself. Which means, essentially, the idea is would normally be, the Rashi points this out, that generally out humility, one would not necessarily go ahead and start, disseminating all of their knowledge. But if no one else is doing it, you have to do it. But if it's being done, then perhaps humility dictates that a person takes a quieter, a more understated approach. So the Gemara says, but if you live in a generation where they love Torah, so then distribute, give out as much of your wisdom as you can. Because again, the quotes over here, the pasuk from Mishlei, when the Mishlei pasuk says sometimes a person gives out, right, and yet he acquires more. So this is the idea that sometimes the more you share of your ruchnius, the more you are given. But if you see a generation ultimately, again, where Torah is not precious to them, so keep your wisdom to yourself, and you don't have to share it with others. Okay, beautiful. So Darsh Bakapara Darshant, Vizalas Kivots Kine Mina. So which literally means, if you have an item and it decreases in value, so buy up as much of it as you can. In other words, buy cheap. Buy cheap because then you could sell high. But the less, so again, I'll say, so remember, Rashi points out over here that this could really be a metaphor for Torah, right? That if Torah is readily available, gather as much as you can, because again, what you are gathering ultimately, again, is very valuable. But also, the less givar taman have givar. So also it's quite beautiful, in a place where literally, again, there are no men, be a man. Be a man. So I'll say, so this obviously, this statement has many different ramifications. It could be in terms of teaching of Torah, but it's also in general, like don't rely on other people to get things done. If something needs to get done and no one else is rising to the occasion, you rise up and get the job done. Amar Abaye, Shmamina, Ba'asr de'is gevar taman, lo tabe gevar. So basically, what do you see from here? That in a place where there is a man, so to speak, you don't have to do it. Now, Rashi understands over here that this is definitely talking about piske halacha. So, right, so if you're living in a place, you're living in a time where no one else is issuing halachic rulings, then rise up to the occasion and issue the halachic rulings. But if there are other people who are doing it, then you don't have to be the person. Then humility would dictate that perhaps you take a back seat. So the Gemara says pshita, so that's obvious. Now, the reason the Gemara says pshita, Rashi points out over here, is because we're assuming what this means is like this. Like, if I have a Rebbe, and my Rebbe is giving forth halachic rulings, I don't have to do it, which of course makes sense. Just al derech eretz, one is not going to give halachic rulings in the presence of the Rebbe. So it's obvious. But we're in a situation where the Talmud is on the same level as the Rebbe. So I might have thought, again, in that kind of situation, the Talmud could even go out and give piskei halacha in the presence of his Rebbe. Kamash Mola, no. Kamashvon, that if the Rebbe is doing it, I don't have to do it. So we'll say there's a lot of profundity in this. In general, first of all, the idea of humility, how a person always has to exercise and a person always has to strive to be humble. In addition to that, it's also in life is about finding out and figuring out what it is that is unique that you bring to the table. In other words, a lot of times there's almost like a yitzhar to be like other people, to replicate what other people are doing. They kind of fall in line with whatever everyone else is doing. But the truth is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not put me in this world to duplicate or to replicate someone else's effort. Hashem put me in this world because I have something unique and something meaningful to contribute. And life is all about figuring out what is my unique and singular contribution, not to replicate or to duplicate what other people are doing. Darash Bar Kapara. So Bar Kapara said, Ezu Parsha, Ketana Shekol Gufei Torah Tluim Ba. So Bar Kapara says something very interesting. What is an example of a pasuk, right? One pasuk in which you could say, like, is the source for all of Yiddishkeit. Like, one pasuk that really highlights the totality of what it is that we are trying to accomplish as individuals. So the Gemara calls the pasuk, B'chol drachecha de'ehu, v'hu yiyasher archosecha. So this is beautiful. The pasuk says literally again, Know HaKadosh Baruch Hu in all of your ways, and He will go ahead and straighten out your pathways. So I'll say, so this is really, really beautiful. That this is really the essence, that in anything I do, I should have God awareness, right? The Baal HaTanya writes about this, that the first halacha in Shulchan Aruch is, or the first statement is, Shivisi Hashem lenegdi samid, God awareness. Because when a person has God awareness, their entire life is different. So therefore the Gemara says, like, what is the one thing upon which all of Yiddishkeit is predicated? B'chol drachecha de'ehu, God awareness. If you have God awareness, then ultimately, again, everything else falls into place. Amar Rava v'afilu dvar avera. So this is incredible. Now what this means is, now this is very interesting, what that means is that sometimes God awareness requires me to commit an Avera. Now what does that mean? So there's a concept of an Avera Lishma. There's a concept of an Avera that is done for the greater good. So there are examples of this. But even without getting too technical, it's like what we saw before, like Boaz goes ahead and introduces greeting with the name of Hashem. Even though one can make the argument that greeting someone with the name of Hashem is not really the optimal way to respect HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but Boaz felt that this was the greatest way to affect God awareness within greater society. So B'chol Drachecha De'ehu means know HaKadosh Baruch Hu in your good deeds, and also means sometimes even know HaKadosh Baruch Hu in your misdeeds. Darash Bar Kapara. Bar Kapara said, the Olam Yilamid Adam Espino Umnos Nikia V'Kala. Person should teach his son an umnos. Umnos means like a profession that is nikia, that is clean, and kala, and that is easy. The Gemara says, he was an example of this. So the Gemara says, Machta de Talmi Yusa. So Amrav Chisda says, Machta de Talmi Yusa. Machta de Talmi Yusa means he knows how to sew. He knows how to sew, right? So he knows how to go ahead and sew in a particular way. So interestingly enough, the idea is, first of all, this is just profound in general, because the Gemara is saying is, you have to teach your child a profession. Meaning, what does mean I have to teach a child a profession? In other words, I have to teach my child ultimately, again, how to be self-sufficient. So the Gemara says, Tanya, Rabbi Omer, Li'olam al yarbe adam re'im b'soch beison. This is interesting, that a person shouldn't have too many friends in his house. So what's the pshat? Shene'emar ish re'im li'isra'ya. Because literally, again, it says a person with a lot of friends is going to come to fight. So it's actually interesting, this idea that a person should be careful with their social interactions, and there's a variety of different things for this, right? Sometimes, again, the more social a person is, the more they open themselves up to different discord or distraction. So the idea ultimately is that just a person should have friends, of course, but a person doesn't have to have their home be the hub of all social activity. Tanya, Rabbi Omer, Al Yimana Adam Apotropis Besoch Beso, Shomole Lo Mina Potifar As Yosef Apotropis Besoch Beso, Lo Ba Lo Osa Davar. So this is interesting. So Rabbi says a person shouldn't have an apotropos. Now, an apotropos is like an executive, someone who runs their household. Why shouldn't you have someone who runs your household? So the Gemara says because this person is going to interact with one's wife often, and this could chas v'shalom lead to immorality. And the example that the Gemara gives is Yosef, right? Yosef got into trouble. Yosef got into trouble with the wife of Potiphar. Why? Because Potiphar put him in charge of his home. And as a result, Yosef was there often. And sometimes, again, the ongoing interaction between a man and a woman could lead to all type of consequences. Therefore, again, Rabbi is just giving solid advice over here, which is a person shouldn't have an apotropos in his home. Now, both say, what I'll point out this is very interesting, that if you notice that both of these things, about having a lot of people in your home and about having an apotropos in your home, it's really Rabbi highlighting the idea that one really has to be careful to create and then to maintain a holy atmosphere in one's home. right? The home is the place where I come to nourish my soul, I come to nourish my family, and that makom, that place, that home should have an aviran atmosphere of kedusha. One more time, Rabbi Omer Lamanisbucha Parshas Nazir Parshas Sota. Why does the Torah juxtapose the section of Nazir with the section of Sota? Lomar Lecha, to teach us Kala Roa Sota B'Kol Kula Yazir Asunan, to teach us fine halacha that if you see a sota, right? Remember again, a sota is a woman who is accused of adultery. If you see a sota, it is better to abstain from wine. In other words, that the Gemara Masechta discusses this idea that sometimes people get themselves into compromised situations with the consumption of too much alcohol. Therefore, if a person goes ahead and sees the sota, sometimes it's good to take a neder to be a nazir, to avoid wine, which hopefully prevents me from getting into complicated situations. So we'll say there's also a profound Gemara because it highlights the idea that when you see overwhelming circumstances in life, there has to be a reaction. So a person sees the sota, which is a person who potentially engaged in such a severe indiscretion that they could have ruined their life and the lives of those around them. And so often it could just be traced to just a bad decision to drink a little too much. So the idea is when you see something overwhelming in this world, and you see something scary, and you see again the destructive nature of people's actions, it is so important to react in some way, to change one's life in some way. So often we encounter circumstances and we just ignore them, or we just peripheralize them. When you see something jarring in life, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants me to see that in order that I take action and in order that I live differently going forward. That was what we'll stop over for today. Shkoyach.